Welcome back. We're here again with Michael Ventura, and we're still in Austin. And I thought I would start out asking him about many of the people that he worked with at that time were in Austin at the time of the time of the tower shooting. I can't off the top of my head remember that guy's name, but
good.
Or
It's good he didn't get famous that way.
Or the year. I think that was 65, maybe.
I suppose we could Google it up or something, but that seems about right. 64, 65.
Yeah, and this
I was. Yeah, go on.
This was really one of the first kind of mass shootings like that, I think, as far as I know. But yeah, go ahead with what you knew about it.
It was the first post World War II like thing that didn't happen in the South. I don't know about the South because the South wasn't getting reported in the 40s and early 50s.
Right.
But it was the first mass shooting, in what became the modern style. I'm horrified to say. I was working at Radio TV Reports in New York, and our job was to listen to the radio, and suddenly the radios and the TVs all had this shooting. And we just stood there, and work stopped. We just stood there and listened to it. And, on-the-spot reporting wasn't as agile as it is today because the equipment was so heavy. And the film took time to be developed, so it wasn't instantaneous like it is today. But we just listened, and you could hear the shots and stuff like that. And I think that was the time my colleague Marty Ring, who had been in the World War II, Battle of the Bulge, he was with the paratroopers, and he'd been one of the outfits that had freed the concentration camps, some concentration camps. And he just turned to me because he saw the horror on my face. These people just getting shot for nothing, listening to it. And he said, "Not enough tears, kid. Not enough tears for all the hurting in this world. Don't start crying. You'll never stop." And I never forgot those words. When I got to Austin, gradually it became clear that people I met, people you would meet later. Big Boy Medlin was walking across the UT campus before he got drafted, and he was looking at a pretty girl, and suddenly she fell.
Wow.
And people realized she fell right a few yards from him. People realized they were being shot at. Took cover. They didn't know where the shots were coming from. And he wanted to get to her, but people trying to get to her were getting shot at. And they didn't get hit. They went back, but he stayed where he was, is the impression I got. And he wrote about this in his novel Slap Noir, N-O-I-R, Slap Noir, about those days. If somebody wants to read about it. Full disclosure, we have a little publishing company, and Jasmine and I published his novel. But we don't make any money on it. It all goes to him. And then there was Jeff Nightbird, who hired me at the Austin Sun. And he, too, was on the campus when that was going down. And he thought, one of the reasons he's a believer in guns, people owning guns and knowing how to use them, is that he thought that the body count would have been higher if people hadn't been shooting back. Well, once it started, people who had the guns that could do it, here and there started shooting back. And Jeff was convinced the body count would have been higher. Ginger was, I believe, and if I'm making a mistake, Ginger, please don't hit me over the head for it, but I believe believe she was bartending at a now legendary place called Bevo's, and people ran in and said people are getting killed out there, and you could see at the time when I got to Austin, almost 10 years later, you could see the bullet marks on the tower where people were shooting back at the guy. And eventually, of course, he was killed.
Yeah, it should say that this guy had prepared heavily. It wasn't just wasn't like he just flipped out and walked up to the top of the tower. He had
Oh, no.
He had brought a few guns up there, and he had brought a lot of ammo up there, and secured. I think he bolted the door to the top of the tower, and some kind of heroic.
No, he was planning on dying up there. He wasn't planning on coming down.
Yeah, there was some kind of heroic cop story about the guy that went up there and got him. I think they made a TV movie about it, but this is just what I remember from looking into it a long time ago. But I think they found he had a tumor, I think, when they examined his brain, and they thought maybe that had something to do with it. But yeah, that's what I know about it.
It was the first, as I said, modern style, in the sense of people going up and doing that, and it being very often a school. It was the first of those, and everybody was just, you wanted to think it was an anomaly. My God, you didn't want to think this was the first of any. And if I'd have been told that then, I doubt I'd have believed it. But it was. And we didn't know it, but it was the beginning of something, the beginning of some, I don't know what to call it. Some seemingly transmittable mental illness. I have no idea what to call it. And it was a complete shock. It was like out of anybody's playbook. And nobody was wise enough to say anything coherent about it, or anything that could make it better. It was what it was. And then when a few years later it started repeating itself, you realize slowly that here was something not uniquely American, because things have been popping up here and there, but basically American. Something in American culture. This bug was there, and there were people who could catch it, is how I'd put it. But that's all I know about it. I know 3 people who survived it, and one of them was definitely getting shot at. Then he had to go to Nam and get shot at some more.
You think that contributed to partly to the culture of Austin and the way Austin was?
I think it was too much at the time. It was too much of an anomaly.
Yeah.
To contribute to the culture. It was something people wanted to put behind them as quick as they could.
Yeah.
And then, but it was at around the time that what came to be known as the culture of Austin was starting to blossom. Pot was drastically illegal in Texas, and yet by circa 1970 or so, head shops were popping up. And it's funny when you think of it. And a gentleman, I so wish I was better at names. The older I get, the worse I am. His nickname was Oat Willie.
Yeah.
And he coined the phrase "onward through the fog." And I finally met him at one of our Not Dead Yet parties that before the COVID was happening once a year in November. J. Dave Moriarty's in Austin. He'd been the managing editor of the Austin Sun. only actually met to talk because, he was a pothead and I wasn't. We went in different circles. But I said, I'm proud to shake your hand. I said, I've written I don't know how many words, but you wrote several words that everybody knows. They don't even know who started it, but you started it. Onward through the fog. I said, I'm proud to make your acquaintance.
What were some of the, how was Austin racially?
Austin was fairly calm racially by the time I got there late in 74. The original Austin staff, Ed Gwynn was African American. There were, our crowd ethically, or sort of religiously, were agnostics, with one or two Jewish people, lots of agnostic Christians, people with that kind of upbringing, and some with no kind of religious upbringing. In fact, no religious upbringing at all was pretty common for the central staff, Jeffrey, Carlene, and ethnically, it was white, 99% white. I don't think there was one Hispanic. Tomas, the photographer, a very good photographer, and I'd be lying if I told you that I remembered his last name. Again, names and being 76 years old. But everybody else was mostly Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I was the only lapsed Catholic that I think on that staff, at least the central staff. And that was my experience on the alternative papers I worked on. It was 15 years on LA Weekly, or 12 years, something like that, before we hired a black writer. It was a white Christian-Jewish staff, Judeo-Christian. And it was about as long before we hired a Hispanic writer.
Yeah, well, I remember it being a pretty segregated town. My school was pretty mixed. There was quite a few black kids there, but it was called Robert E. Lee Elementary. I remember Mom taking me to somehow she found out about a teacher at a high school in East Austin that was showing a video made by Bill Cosby about how the media portrayed blacks, and she took me to go see this, and it was an all-black high school that she took me to, and everybody was looking sideways at us, of course, and Mom was totally oblivious to it, but yeah, I remember the city itself being, I guess it was no more segregated than any place else. I was just kind of interested if you had any insights into that.
Blacks and Hispanics lived in East Austin.
Yeah.
And when J. Dave and Sarah bought their place, their plot of ground, facing the river in East Austin, pizza deliverers wouldn't deliver there. And yet J. Dave and Sarah lived there safely, but delivery wouldn't go there. As ever these days, East Austin since become gentrified, and I don't know where they push those people to. Yeah, it was a very segregated town. Look, Clarendon, Texas, this tiny little town, I didn't even know there was a black population in Clarendon, Texas, and I lived there for a year.
Yeah.
If you crossed the railroad tracks, there was, in a town of 1,300, there was 200-300 black people across the railroad tracks. They didn't shop on the other side of those tracks. It wasn't worth their safety.
Yeah.
And yet it was so quiet. Everybody was so quiet about all that. that literally I was from the East Coast. I didn't know the rules, and I didn't know there were any there. They were that well hidden.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I remember school was pretty mixed, but as far as the city goes, I never saw black people where we went. You know, I never saw them at clubs. I didn't see them downtown. It seemed kind of segregated that way,
Yeah,
but just kind of a de facto segregation.
exactly.
Yeah.
De facto segregation.
Yeah.
And all of our Texas friends could remember when the bathrooms and the water fountains and everything were strictly segregated when they were younger. In Austin and Lubbock, the way that the clubs weren't segregated is all the black blues players that played there. You know, Antone's and other places. Just you had a bunch of people who just loved the blues, and a bunch of young white musicians like Stevie learning from those people.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about Butch Hancock, and did he come to live in Austin at the same time that you did, or did he come a little bit after you?
He came down about a year later. I was in the right time and place, so I have the I don't know, honor or luck more than that. I was the first person to write about Butch in the newspaper, first person to write about Joe, first person to write about Stevie, all by himself.
Wow.
Because I was there, and they were just starting. But he came down about a year after I did. I wrote a piece about him when he's going to do his first gigs. Now, Butch he's still around. An extraordinary, probably the most multi-talented person. He could build a house from the ground up. I've seen him walk on his hands at the edge of a cliff just because he can. He doesn't have the mathematics for it, but he can talk about his theories of energy. You know, we're all made of energy, all creators made of energy. And he can talk about those theories on and on. And while he's talking, I understand it. If I had to repeat it, I don't think I could. But when he's talking, it's really complex stuff and it's making sense. He's quite an able visual artist in his drawings, and he's a professional level photographer. He has many, many files that will probably be left to some foundation or something when he's gone, of the extensive photographic record he's taken of everything, not mostly of people, but of places. And some people, but mostly of places and things he's seen. On top of being this extraordinary songwriter and somebody who leads raft expeditions down the Rio Grande and across the rapids, and like that. I mean, in terms of physical prowess, in terms of different kinds of knowledge, different kinds of talents. I don't know anybody like Butch Hancock. Anybody who can pull that many rabbits out of that many hats. And especially when we were in Austin together. And we were in Clarendon too. But then in Austin, he and I would have all night talks. Let me give you an example. We started talking. We'd meet at a cafe, and in those days there were two Nighthawk cafes, I believe, two in Austin, and they were open all night. Denny's was open all night, and there was a cafe on the road out of South Austin. At that time, South Austin stopped at Old Torf, and beneath that there was some built up along the highways, but nothing else practically. And it was an all-night diner on one of those roads out of South Austin. And we'd meet up 10, 11 o'clock at night, maybe after his gig somewhere. And we'd get a booth, and he'd pull out his pen and his notebook, and I'd pull out my pen and my notebook. and we get into a big conversation, right? Each one writing down what the other was saying, and one of our subjects, just to show you how funny and abstruse some of this stuff was. We had decided we were talking, and the central figure, the central male figure, certainly in Western civilization, of course, is Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus Christ, or however you want to call him.
Yeah, we talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did I talk about this already?
About Jesus and just the female Jesus, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So we compared these notes, thinking about very respectfully that Jesus is a goddess.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. And we were in our late 20s, early 30s, and we were having a very good time.
Yeah.
And our minds ranging all over the place. And with Butch, you just couldn't outdistance Butch. Butch was way out ahead of you on whatever you were thinking of, and he'd have something to say you never heard before. And I remember my first article on him. He and Jimmy had just written a song that they didn't record for another 20 years, but it was called Yesterday Was Judgment Day, and it went, yesterday was Judgment Day, how'd you do, were you sleeping when all your nightmares and dreams came true, something like that. Did you wake up in heaven, or did you wake up in hell? And I bet you never knew it would be so hard to tell. And most singers are writing about stuff that were very appropriate to bars. These singers, Joe and Jimmy, and Joe Ely and Jimmy Dale Gilmore, and Joe Carroll Pierce and Butch Hancock, they were writing about stuff that was way, way out of the bars, way down the road from what most people were thinking or knew how to think. So, but also with Butch, that energy, that is a positive energy, but a very uncompromising in the sense of you look at anything in the eye. Butch never backed off thinking about anything. It was very impressive still is when we get together again, rarely now, to listen to and to participate with.
So he comes down to... Sorry, go on. I was just going to say he comes down to Austin about a year after about you
get...
A
year after me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so the Austin Sun was as established as it was going to get, so I could write about him and get him some audience. After the first time, he didn't need to be written about. Wherever he played, there'd be an audience. And then he and Jimmy and Joe, they formed the Flatlanders. Now, they'd recorded the first Flatlanders out before I met them. They recorded it in Nashville, sometime in 72.
Huh.
And they recorded another one in Odessa that they forgot all about. And that finally got unearthed about 10 years ago. But their recording in Nashville in 72 didn't get issued until about 1988. And as the Flatlanders, all three of them are famous all over Europe and Australia. The Flatlanders get an audience all over Europe and Australia. They hardly noticed the U.S., but they became the Flatlanders in Lubbock. And when one of them came to town, I would introduce them, in print I mean, as one of the legendary Flatlanders. So when they finally put the album out, they called it more a legend than a band.
And then Stevie Ray Vaughan is starting to play around Austin at that time too? Or?
Jimmy Vaughan, his older brother, had the Thunderbirds.
Right.
And they were a really good, tight blues group. guitar, and I think I did mention this, second guitar with Paul Ray and the Cobras,
Yeah.
who were kind of the house band for the Soap Creek Saloon. Well, then Stevie broke away from that. He was still pretty young, about 18 or so, and I would go wherever Stevie was playing, and sometimes it was an almost empty room, but his guitar was unique. It was his playing. Nobody else was doing what he was doing. And, I wrote the novel that I wrote about that time. I wrote something to the effect of, one guy plays a note and it just hangs in the air. Stevie plays the same note. It goes right through you. It's got blood and memories on it. And he just had that touch. And he was Stevie Vaughan then, not Stevie Ray Vaughan. I still have a Stevie Vaughan poster. And it was it seemed a little impossible that this young guy who, clearly had no head for business, was totally in his music. We ran in different circles. I can't say we were friends. We were friendly, let's put it that way. I didn't run in circles where there were drugs. He did, and that's always a barrier, almost always anyway. And Stevie, as he was growing as a guitar player and people were listening harder, he was married to a woman named Lenny, and I was one of the people Lenny would call if Stevie played so hard on his guitars that he and I went to Anton's one night. We were just driving around going from place to place in my car, and went to Anton's, and Marsha Ball was playing with her band, and they were really good. And Marsha asked Stevie if he wanted to sit in on a break, not over the microphone or anything. And Stevie said, "I can't sit in with other people. I'll break his guitar." And I don't have the money to replace it. And then he signed a contract with I don't know who, some kind of manager or something. And they called me because I just made my first movie, Roadie, and I got paid a lot of money. I didn't know what to do. It was a lot of money to me, and they needed to get out of that contract, and I gave them the money they had to do it, and I just said, "Look, this is for the music. You don't owe me anything." And they did pay me back in a couple of years, but I wasn't looking for it. And they got out of that contract, and that's when they landed his first record deal, and that's when he was about to make it. But you never thought of a guy like him making it.
Yeah.
Because so innocent in a way, and I don't mean that in some corny way.
Yeah.
He was so deeply in the music. He'd tell me about dreaming of Jimi Hendrix giving him lessons.
Yeah.
And Lenny would tell me about how in his sleep he's playing guitar. She'd wake him up because he would be playing guitar in sleep. And he was just so completely in the music. And you heard that when he played, even when he was like 17 and playing second guitar for Paul Ray and the Cobras. You heard that this guy's life was at stake every time he hit a note. And I remember just sitting there thinking, I want to write the same way. This guy never wastes any time. Any kind of, if it's just a little break, he's going to put everything he has into it. That's the way I want to write. And so Stevie was an influence on me, even though I'm not sure how much older, but at least 10 years, probably more. And then he goes and becomes a star. Nothing surprised me more. and he was just as good playing for a big crowd as he'd been playing in the clubs. But I felt very privileged to have heard him in the clubs where people danced and where it wasn't a big production, and where the band on a break would come and talk to me.
Yeah.
And other people, he'd been sort of dormant for a long time. And every band around town, including Stevie's, on their break, they wanted to come up to the Soap Creek Saloon, which is on Lamar then, north of Lamar, and listen to Carl Perkins, meet Carl Perkins. And I remember the drummer saying, I got him to sign the instep of my boot. and, but it was a small enough town, and people could do that. I don't know how coherent I'm being at the moment, but...
No, this is great. Yeah. Oh.
And there was a lot of appreciation across genres. The first punk band that called itself a punk band in Austin, because we talked about it I think before. The Sex Pistols played their first American gig in San Antonio,
right? And
they came up through Austin. And by the way, I found that tape, and I'm going to send it to you.
Cool.
So there was a punk band, and it had a girl guitarist in it who became Kathy Valentine. And when Ginger Varney saw Kathy Valentine's photo on the cover of Rolling Stone, taking a walk in L.A., she went, I used to babysit her. She's doing on the cover of magazine.
Kathy Valentine's the Go-Go's or the Bangles?
Yeah, the Go-Go's.
Yeah.
But she was with this band, the Skunks, I think they were called. I could be wrong, but I think. And because I didn't like the music, but it wasn't my music, but I wanted to interview these people. I want to see what they were up to. Yeah. And did an interview for the last incarnation of the Austin Sun. And I asked him about Stevie. And I said, oh, yeah, we listen to Stevie. You sure we listen to Stevie? Stevie's great. I mean, and there was that kind of cross-pollination of styles in Austin. Everybody listened to everybody. And, not to make it sound more idealistic than it was funky, it was this, it was that. Everybody had their own problems and all that kind of stuff. It was life. But it was a very alive scene. And and the only people who cared about it were the people who lived there. Austin was not on anybody's map outside of Austin at the time.
So, what about Big Boy? You're working at the paper with him right now, right?
Yeah, and Big and I had a lot of respect for each other. We didn't know each other, and again, we moved in different circles. We weren't friends in Austin, but we had a lot of respect for each other. And the paper, as I like to say, Titanicked under us. Autumn of '77, it was gone.
Really?
And yeah, it's a miracle it lasted 3 years. Come on.
Yeah. So what year did you start working there? 74?
74.
Yeah? Okay.
Late 74.
Yeah. Huh.
And its first issues came out in October '74, and so it was gone. I was still in Austin. He was still in Austin. Who knew if we'd ever write for publication again? Nobody'd heard of us outside of Austin. And Christmas week of '77, we get phone calls from Jeff Nightbird. He's in Los Angeles, and Larry Flint, the Hustler publisher, has bought the LA Free Press, and he wants to turn it into a national magazine. And a friend of Jeffrey's, Jay Levin, who made his bones on the Washington Post long before it was a conservative paper, back when it was a muckraking kind of let's expose the bastards kind of paper. Jay Levin, he'd been hired by Flint to make it a national magazine. But Jay hired Jeffrey to be, I think, cultural editor, but fact check me on that. Any of you out there?
Yeah.
And Jeff turned around, phoned up me and Big, said I was going to be the film editor, and Big was going to be the humorous sports writer for a liberal national magazine called the LA Free Press. And all this got around very quickly among the gang. There was back when any rent was cheap in Austin, including those mansions kind of south of Guadalupe, on the west side of town. And there was a falling down mansion that Bill Bentley had with a bunch of other people. And New Year's Eve party was going to be there. And I was leaving for L.A., going to drive to L.A. the next day or the next day or the next. And they wanted to fly Big to the Super Bowl so he could cover the Super Bowl for the National L.A. Free Press. And Big and I, Big puts his arm around me, and we walk out on the lawn. And he's looking at me with a grin, and he said, "Man, we are so lucky."
Yeah.
I don't know how this is happening. And it was like, we're playing, they're going to put me in the big time. They're going to make big star. And that's exactly how we felt. And so suddenly, I'm in L.A. And we're staying at the Montecito Hotel, and we're staying at the Montecito Hotel, which had been a rock star motel, and that was just falling apart in Hollywood. And we are writing for this thing, and all excited because we were going to do a few issues in L.A., just the regular LA Free Press. And then it was going to go national. We were going to be national stars. And then the first glitch that happened was that Jay Levin and Larry Flint just didn't get along.
Yeah, I can see that.
Larry Flint thought was wrong. So they were trying to whip each other into shape. And then Larry Flint got shot.
Oh.
Somebody tried to kill him. And instead they put him in a wheelchair. But that was the end of the National LA Free Press.
Huh.
And Big Boy and me and Jeffrey, we went and got pretty drunk at a bowling alley, if you can imagine it, in Hollywood. And Hollywood was really dingy then.
Yeah.
It was really down on its luck then. It was dangerous to walk there at night. I mean, it was, you kept your guard up in Hollywood back in those days. And the only famous restaurant left in Hollywood was on Frank's. And Greenblatt's Delicatessen. And we were at this bowling alley, and we made a pact that we were going to stay for 2 years. We were going to stay for 2 years and see what happened. And we get ourselves a place and try our Hollywood luck for 2 years. And we bowled. I mean, Big was the only athlete of the bunch. He'd really been an athlete. You could see that by how he bowled. Of course, me and Jeffrey weren't worth anything. We just practically threw that bowling ball. And we made our pact. And what we did in the new house is we threw a party. The house was over in Silver Lake on Ewing, big enough for the three of us. All our neighbors were Latin American, and everybody was fine with it. They were fine with us. We were fine with them. And we started throwing parties for all the Texans who had migrated to L.A. because they weren't getting invited to anybody else's parties. and Big Boy especially knew how to throw a good party. So one of the people who came to the parties, one of the early parties, was a man not dead named Zalman King.
Yeah.
Who's been a TV actor, in fact, in that Harry O that you sent me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Zalman is the crazy guy in the first episode.
Really?
Yeah, that's him in the first episode. The one with Andrea Marcavecchi and the very young Jodie
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good pilot. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a great pilot,
yeah.
and that's Zalman King there,
Huh.
being a badass, and and uh, and Zal had ambitions to be a producer and this and that, and so I invited him because I had his number because he'd come down pushing the movie, and I interviewed him just because I'd read about him a little bit. Harlan Ellison had written about him in his TV column, and so Zal came to the party, and then the next day, Big was walking on the beach with Margie Bentley, who later married one of Elizabeth Taylor's sons, but was married to Bill's brother Bob's. They were in Hollywood, and they were walking on the beach, Big and Margie, and they ran into Zal was jogging. The jogging craze was just starting. Americans didn't used to run so much, and Zal asked him what he was up to, and Big said he was going to go to their annual John Wesley Hardin party in Austin. And Zal said, "Who's John Wesley Hardin?" Because most people hadn't heard of John Wesley Hardin. And Big said, it gave him the whole rap over. I guess they all went to lunch of John Wesley Hardin, and Zal said, "Can you and Ventura write a screenplay about that?" And Big, when he got back to Ewing, where we lived, and he said, "Can we write a screenplay about that?" And I said, "Man, we've been watching movies all our lives. If we can't write a screenplay about this, I should throw away my typewriter." And Zal commissioned a treatment. We didn't even know what a treatment was.
Yeah.
And, there was no Turner Classic Movies. There was no home videos at the time. I'm talking 1978. But we stayed up late to watch Westerns. We'd go over to Bob and Margie's. A John Ford Western was going to be on at 1 in the morning with Cal Worthington and his dog Spot.
Yeah.
And we stay up, till dawn watching Westerns. Okay, what do we want to do with this treatment? Blah, 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 blah. And we wrote this treatment that might as well have been a novel. It was about 25 pages. Good treatments shouldn't be more than 5. And we got paid $500 for that treatment. I mean, we've been in L.A. for 6 months, and we were getting, Yankee dollars for writing a movie.
Yeah.
Two guys, the only two guys I know who are writers who went to L.A. without any ambition to write a movie. It never crossed my mind. It never crossed his. Ever. And Zal writes, he looks at the treatment and says, "Well, this stinks and this stinks and this stinks, but I like this. If you can do this and make it into a movie." So we can do it. And bingo. We weren't guild writers, so he could pay us cheap, but for us it was money. $2,000 was a lot of money in those days.
Yeah.
And plenty enough to live on in L.A. $1,000 a piece, for several months. And that treatment, that screenplay is still the best thing we've done, and we own it now. And if you know any producers, you don't know how many people have optioned that treatment.
Really?
Robbie Robertson.
Yeah.
Is the first one that comes to mind, but plenty of people over these 40 years have optioned that screenplay to get it made. Charles Durning, we had a great meeting with Charles Durning, and he didn't look the part of the gunfighter, but he's a great actor, and he would have done something with it.
Yeah.
We had a wonderful meeting with him. Over the years, every once in a while, somebody gets a hold of that script, and once I saw Deadwood. You've seen Deadwood, the TV show?
Yeah.
When I saw the first episode of Deadwood, I went, they finally caught up to us. This is the kind of thing we did in the John Wesley Hardin script.
Wasn't there a John Wesley Harding movie, though?
say there's a movie called The Gunfighter with Gregory Peck.
Okay.
Where he plays a gunfighter named John Wesley Hardin, and he gets killed pretty much the way John Wesley Hardin did.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of Judge Roy Bean. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, so that's, that's what happened, and then a couple of months later, Jay Levin says, I'm getting money together. We're going to put out an LA Weekly. What are we going to call it? Why don't we call it the LA Weekly?
Yeah.
Okay. He said, I want you to do film. And I said, it's LA. I can't do film alone. So I know somebody named Ginger Varney. I think she can do it better than me. Let's put her on and make her the film editor. And so Ginger was film editor, and I was her staff writer, and Joy Davidoff was the entertainment's editor, and we made a dummy copy. We wrote what would be, give them samples in this dummy copy of how it would be laid out, how it would be written. He raised the money on that at the end of 1978, before we'd been there a full year. The first issue of the LA Weekly came out.
So at the time, there was just the Reader, yeah? Or
it wasn't even the Reader. The Reader started right around the same week the LA Weekly.
Really? Wow. Huh.
So that's a pretty good place to leave it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. That's exciting, man. That was a good one. Okay. I'll stop here. Hold on a second.